And welcome to this TCG webinar. We have critical mass, I believe, and so I think we are going to get started. I will introduce myself later on in the program, and for now, I am just going to turn it over to Teresa Eyring, TCG's Executive Director.
Thank you so much, Laurie. Hi, everyone. I'm Teresa Eyring, Executive Director of TCG, and I use she, her pronouns. And I am just thrilled to welcome you all to this webinar, Accessing PPP, Save Our Stages, also known as Shuttered Venue Operators Grants, and more. I'm going to start by sharing a visual description myself with you now. I'm a white woman with longish brown hair. I am wearing a blue jacket with a blue shirt underneath, and I'm sitting in a room that is fairly nondescript, so I won't describe it to you. In this webinar, we're going to be focusing on the current PPP and SOS opportunities, as well as newly expanded employee retention tax credits. We're going to hear from leaders whose advocacy efforts made these opportunities possible. And it truly is a success of many advocates working together toward historic support for the arts in our country. And on the eve of Inauguration Day, we'll look ahead to additional advocacy opportunities with the new administration. Before we get started, we'll take a moment to offer our respects to the many lands on which we gather and to honor the traditional stewards of these lands. If you have a land acknowledgement as part of your personal or organizational practice, we invite you to share them in the comments now. And while you do that, I'm going to read the land acknowledgement that is posted at TCG's office. Theater Communications Group's offices are located on the Lenape Island of Mannahatta in Lenapehoking, the Lenape homeland. We honor the generations of stewardship the Lenape peoples have given to the water, air, and land. As guests, we pay respect to the Lenape peoples, past, present, and future, here in their homeland and throughout the Lenape diaspora. As you add your own land acknowledgements to the chat, I also want to acknowledge the unique moment in which we're meeting. Tomorrow is Inauguration Day, a day filled with hope, as well as concern that the white supremacist forces who assaulted Capitol Hill a few weeks ago might attempt to interrupt the peaceful transfer of power. We know these acts of white supremacy can be particularly harmful to witness for our BIPOC colleagues. The pandemic is still very much with us in spite of vaccine progress. So while this is a webinar to celebrate our recent advocacy successes and learn how to access federal relief, those other things are still present. And I urge us to take care of ourselves and take care of each other now and in the days to come. I want to talk now briefly through our agenda today. We'll get started with some opening remarks from Nataki Garrett of Oregon Shakespeare Festival and Oskar Eustis of the Public Theater. We'll then hear from our own Laurie Baskin, who you just met, Heather Noonan from the League of American Orchestras, and Tony Shivers of Dance USA and Opera America. Laurie, Heather, and Tony will share information about the Shuttered Venues Operators Grants, the PPP Round 2, and employee retention tax credits. They will be followed by Jessica Monahan and David Skillman of Arnold Porter to share an overview of their work and their outlook for the new administration and Congress. We're also going to have some time for questions and answers. And this webinar is being recorded and we will share it with you afterward and you can share it with others. So before I hand it over to Laurie to get us started, there are two things I want to share. First, we need to acknowledge that Black theaters, Indigenous theaters, and all theaters of color, or BIPOC, have been hardest hit by the pandemic and are in greatest need of support. We know that BIPOC had a harder time accessing PPP and other forms of federal relief in 2020, and we want to make sure that they are equitably served this time around. To that end, we've asked all of our panelists to bring our shared commitment to anti-racism to this webinar. We're also working with BITALK leaders on a BITALK-centered session to access these opportunities, so please stay tuned. Centering BITALK and BIPOC in our programming is a key part of our new strategic plan at TCG and our new mission to lead for a just and thriving theater ecology. Second thing, this webinar is not the only way we're hoping to help. TCG staff will be supporting peer-led technical assistance over the coming weeks through the Finance Director Circle group, which is an online professional affinity space for finance staff. And this online community and listserv, it was a major resource during the last round of federal relief funds. So we encourage interested finance staff to join by emailing Corinna Schulenberg, and she will put her email in the chat right now. And I'll just say it is cschulenberg@tcg.org. Now, it is my great pleasure to turn things over to my colleague, Laurie Baskin, to lead us through the webinar. Laurie has been a major force, tremendous force in our work to secure these major federal relief and recovery funds. And I am so tremendously grateful to her for her efforts. Laurie?
Thank you, Teresa. Hi, everyone. I think it takes a village. I certainly didn't do this alone. We've all been working real hard to get this thing across the finish line. There's a very special group that formed, and there are some folks here to talk about their work, why they formed, and how they contributed to this large effort that so many participated in. So with that, I actually just want to turn it right back around and turn it over to Nataki Garrett.
Hi, everybody. Nataki Garrett here, Artistic Director of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and I'll be very brief. Several months back, sometime over the summer, there was an article in the New York Times that named several major players within our industry and said that if those people got together and went up to Capitol Hill, we might be able to procure some of the same kind of legislation that led to Britain giving their theaters and arts organizations resource. Well, we all know that they're resourced differently, and the British structure is completely different than the United States structure. But the next day I called Maria Goyanis and said, when do you want to get started on this? And then we made some phone calls and brought this whole thing together. I have to say that my initial push was 100% inspired by the work that Laurie Baskin had done. Since joining the board at TCG, I don't know how many emails I've received from Laurie pre-COVID, years of receiving some sort of notification from Laurie asking for advocacy. So the impetus for this was yes, advocacy, yes, we can do this, and yes, I can answer the call in this way. Let me just make a couple of phone calls and see if there's any interest to build some sort of coalition around how can we also get into this conversation around being advocates for ourselves and support the work that TCG has been doing for so many decades. And so with that, I'll pass it on to Oskar. But the point of purpose is to save the industry and to make sure that we come back stronger, not going back to normal, but going forward to better.
Thank you, Nataki. I'm Oskar Eustis, Artistic Director of the Public Theater here in New York. He, his, him, and I'm speaking to you from Brooklyn on the unceded land of the Lenape and Canarsie peoples. And I look like the bedraggled white hippie that I actually am. So picture that, those of you on the phone. And all I will say is that when Maria Goyanis and Nataki Garrett called me, I did as I was told and sprang to action, and feel that we've put together really a really effective group of theaters, which we are going to invite all of you to join as we move forward. But what we saw, I think, was a historical moment where in the 1930s, as part of an employment bill, the Federal Theater Project was created. In the 1960s, out of the abundance of the post-war period, the NEA was created, and that this might be another period where it's possible to redefine the federal government's relationship to the nonprofit theater. Certainly, the success of the Shuttered Venues grant would point to the fact that something is really different because it's the largest amount of money that's ever been devoted to the American stages. With that, the only other things for me to do is to thank deeply Arnold and Porter, who you will have a chance to meet, David Skillman and Jessica Monahan in a little bit. They have been just spectacular partners for us in Washington. We're really grateful to them. And for me to add to the chorus of praise for Laurie Baskin, who, you know, at times in a very lonely way has been leading this charge for 30 years. And just, we're really grateful that the rest of us are catching up with you, Laurie. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Nataki and Oskar. Hasn't been 30 years. I'll stick with 22 years, but thank you. So I am Laurie Baskin, Director of Advocacy at Theater Communications Group. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am zooming in from the lands of the Lenape and Wappinger people in northern Westchester. I'm working from home. And yeah, don't we all feel a little lonely? I've been here since March in my family room. Welcome to my home. Yeah, I'm a white woman with shoulder length brown hair. I'm wearing a gray turtleneck, and we're delighted to have you all here today. I'm going to start off now with, I'm going to share my screen and show some slides. We're going to get into the nitty gritty, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues, Heather and then Tony, and they each have slides as well, and we'll go on from there. So let's see if I can do this smoothly. There we go. All right. Here we are. We're going to talk about Save Our Stages, which is now called Shuttered Venue Operator Grants, SVOGs. Let's get used to it. No more Save Our Stages. It's SVOGs. As you know, it was originally introduced by Senators Cornyn from Texas and Klobuchar from Minnesota. It had a leg up on all other bills that were introduced in 2020 that were meant to serve our field because it was bipartisan. So it was great. And here it is. It really is historic that $15 billion has been devoted to arts and entertainment. The bill does authorize the Small Business Administration to make grants to live venue operators, producers, promoters, or talent representatives that address the economic effects of the pandemic. So some specifics, and again, I'm going to dive in now and we'll take questions later at the end. Theaters can qualify to apply even if they do not own their own performance space. Live performing arts organization operators are specifically eligible and are defined as an individual or entity that, as a principal business activity, organizes, promotes, produces, manages, or hosts live concerts, comedy shows, theatrical productions, or other events by performing artists. Eligibility is offered to both for-profit and nonprofits, as well as independent motion picture theater operators, some relevant museum operators, and talent representatives. Applicants must demonstrate a minimum 25% decline in gross earned revenue in one calendar quarter of 2020 compared to the same quarter in 2019 to qualify to apply. Gross earned revenue has not yet been defined by SBA, but I believe that will come soon and we'll talk more about it. An applicant may have received a PPP forgivable loan in 2020 from round one, but you must choose whether to seek an SVOG grant or apply for a second PPP loan. A live venue operator or promoter, theatrical producer, or live performing arts organization operator means an individual or entity that, as a principal business activity, and I'm repeating myself, but to give everybody comfort, organizes, promotes, produces, manages, or hosts live concerts, comedy shows, theatrical productions, or other events by performing artists for which, and this last paragraph is something that I've received a lot of questions about, not less than 70% of the earned revenue of the individual or entity is generated through cover charges or ticket sales, production fees or production reimbursements, nonprofit educational initiatives, or the sale of event beverages, food, and merchandise. Or, and that's an important or, an individual or entity that, as a principal business activity, makes available for purchase by the public an average of not less than 60 days before the date of the event, tickets to events. So 70% of the earned revenue is generated through all of those things combined: tickets, production fees or production reimbursements, nonprofit educational activity initiatives, and so forth. Or you sell your tickets at least 60 days in advance. Grant amounts. Applicants will calculate their grant amount based on 45% of an entity's gross earned revenue in 2019, with a cap of $10 million per recipient. $2 billion is reserved for eligible applications with up to 50 full-time employees. I want to say that, and I want to go back to something that Teresa said at the outset. TCG is particularly interested and committed to providing guidance, especially to support culturally specific and marginalized communities. We want all of us to acknowledge that Black, Indigenous, theaters of color, BITOCs have been hardest hit by the pandemic and are in greatest need of support, and we want to center their needs. We know they had a harder time in 2020 accessing PPP and other federal forms of relief, and we want to make sure that those organizations are served this year. $2 billion is reserved for smaller organizations with fewer than 50 full-time employees, and they are actually prioritized by the Small Business Administration, you'll see on their website. So we're going to do everything we can to make sure that you have the information you need to apply and access these funds. After receiving an initial grant, qualifying applicants that are experiencing a 70% revenue decline as of April 1st, 2021, can receive a supplemental grant equal to half their initial grant award. Supplemental grant awards will only be awarded after applications received in the first 60 days of the program have been processed. I don't know if there'll be money left for supplemental grants, but we'll see. Eligible costs. Grants may be used for costs incurred from March 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2021. Allowable expenses include payroll, including payments to independent contractors, rent, fixed costs like mortgage and debt payments, as well as maintenance expenses, administrative costs, and other expenses. Some things you're going to need. We believe that these grants are going to go through grants.gov. You need a DUNS number. I've put in this slide the actual link to grants.gov that talks about how to obtain your DUNS number. This is the Data Universal Number System, and it's the first step in registering as an organization in grants.gov. You also need a SAMS number. This is the System for Award Management, and it's a required step in order for your organization to be eligible to apply for, or to be able to apply for federal grants. And again, the link on grants.gov. The Small Business Administration they did a very short webinar last week and posted a page. I'm providing the link here. Updates will be posted to this page. There's some preliminary information there. I do believe that it is subject to change and updating, but it is the place to look, as well as I will be posting updates as they become available on the TCG Circle, and that is, so there's the SBA link here and the Circle link below. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it to Heather Noonan to carry on with some more information about SVOGs, and then Heather, you can turn it to Tony right after. Thank you.
Okay. Great, thanks very much, Laurie. My name is Heather Noonan, and I'm the Vice President for Advocacy with the League of American Orchestras. I'm zooming to you from the land of the Piscataway, and my visual description is I'm a white woman with shoulder-length red hair, a black sweater, and behind me in my home office here is an Irish drum on the wall, which is a prized possession in our family. Also, I do use she, her pronouns. And like everyone else, I want to just express my gratitude to Laurie for being an extraordinary partner to the national arts community on not only the programs we're discussing today, but really every federal policy initiative that supports the arts sector and the creative workforce. So thank you, Laurie. So I will attempt to share my screen here. And hopefully this is visible to you now. I'm just going to follow up right where Laurie left off, but first just start by emphasizing that there's really a national network of advocates that include the theater community that has done an extraordinary job on all aspects of federal COVID relief advocacy. The shuttered venue operator grants and the employee retention tax credits are the two bits that I'm going to cover in just a few minutes here. And just pick up on these priority periods to start out. One thing to be aware of as we move through this guidance that we have available today is that it is relatively sparse. So there's a lot of unanswered questions and what can be known about eligibility criteria and exactly the timing for how these resources will flow. The other thing to be aware is that you're probably wondering, where are we getting this information? Like, you know, there's only so much on the SBA website. Well, what we are looking at is the literal letter of the law. So we're looking at the entire relief package and looking at the legislation, but the SBA does have a degree of authority to enhance their guidance, to direct it in certain ways. And we certainly, I think, all saw that through the administration of the Paycheck Protection Program. So what you see on the slide here is what's known about the priority periods from the letter of the law. So Congress designed 2 priority periods, and the intent of these priority periods was to deliver most rapidly the relief resources to those that have been hardest hit and have had the most significant revenue declines. In the law, the language simply says revenue. So I know there's a lot of questions about, is this gross revenue? Is this earned revenue? It's not explicit. And when you look at the SBA site, you'll see they don't yet have fine points on that either. But the intention is that in the first 14 days, if an organization or entity has experienced a revenue decline of 90% or more, then they have first access to the program. And then in the second 14 days, a revenue decline of 70% or more. When looking at the comparative revenue declines, there is a specific time period that's referenced here. And they do establish alternate time periods for those organizations that operate seasonally. And that seasonal time period will be designed by the SBA administrator. So that's information still to come. And we do know for certain that in calculating these revenue declines, relief funds that have been accessed through the CARES Act are not counted as revenue for the calculation. We're not yet clear whether that's true for both federal and state administered CARES Act funding. That might be something that we all are looking for in future guidance. And then finally, in recognition of the fact that there will be organizations that are deserving of relief but don't fit into these 2 priority periods, there is a 20% reserve for funding at the conclusion of the priority periods for those organizations that don't meet these requirements. So last week, the SBA issued a lightning fast webinar to review what's known to the agency about administering this program. And what they did simultaneously was post on their website some initial outline of how the program might be administered. So if you go to sba.gov and click on their coronavirus resources, you'll find an extra link that will take you to the SBO grant program. And on that page, you'll see that they take a slightly different approach to these priority periods that I just outlined. So the SBA is proposing that they will open only to small entities with up to 50 employees for the first 60 days of the program's administration, and that within those 60 days would occur these first and second priority periods that have the revenue decline requirements attached. In the bill, they specify 50 FTE employees, and they use a special calculation for FTEs created under the legislation. We haven't seen specifics about this from the SBA yet, so I know a lot of people will be saying, how do I do this calculation? I believe that if they are consistent with the bill, it would be an FTE calculation, and it would be looking back towards the end of February of 2020 to take that snapshot in time. But again, given that SBA has a degree of latitude for how it administers this, we might see this change. So essentially, if you don't fit into the under 50 category or the revenue decline requirements, you'll be looking at 60 days into the program, on that 61st days, finding your eligibility for this. Before we move on to the ERTC, I just want to highlight a couple of things that were conveyed by the SBA last week too, which is that it is their intention to do far more public events explaining this program. So they already mentioned they have future, assumingly longer webinars coming for the public. They also did suggest identifying and getting to know your local SBA office. So it's possible that this will most likely be nationally administered by the SBA, that your local SBA offices might be on hand to provide some degree of technical assistance in navigating the application process. That's another tip we all might follow. And with that, I will shift to an entirely different topic, and that's the employee retention tax credits. And we want to be sure to bring this forward today, not in a lot of great detail, but to make sure that you're watching carefully for next steps on this. If most of you navigated the Paycheck Protection Program last year, this will be a whole new topic to you, because the ERTC was not available to any PPP loan recipient last year. However, looking ahead, we have two huge opportunities for employers. And that is that you can retroactively, even if you received a PPP loan last year, you can access this employee retention tax credit under the terms that were available in 2020. So the only limitation, both for 2020 and 2021, moving ahead, is that you can't access the ERTC for wages that are also covered by a PPP loan. Now, how does this refundable payroll tax credit work? It's important to note for nonprofits that it's refundable and it applies to your payroll tax liability. The refundable aspect means that if the value of the credit exceeds the payroll taxes your organization has to pay, then you're actually receiving money back from the federal government for the difference. Also, there's a special form you can use to have that value of the credit advanced to you to support payroll. So again, this is a giant opportunity. It's worth reading up about it. I've outlined here the differences between the 2020 retroactive application of this and the 2021. And so you can see that the value of the credit is much higher in 2021 than in 2020. And you'll also see that your access to the credit, the primary qualifying access, is either that your organization was fully or partially suspended due to COVID or experienced a revenue decline. And those criteria vary from last year's retroactivity to this year's expanded application. My final tip on the ERTC is to go ahead, even though they haven't issued guidance, go ahead and look at last year's FAQ from the Treasury website, just to get familiar with the program and understand how it will likely work for you. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our colleague, Tony Shivers.
Thank you, Heather. I appreciate it, and thank you for providing that information. I also have a slide deck that I will attempt to share.
While Tony is bringing that up, this is Laurie again. We will share our slide decks along with the recording of this so that you'll get that information and the links that are embedded in them.
Hopefully everyone can see my slide deck. My name is Tony Shivers again. I'm Government Affairs with Dance USA and Opera America. He, him, his is my pronoun. I am blessed to be on the land of the Monahoic, which is in Northern Virginia. I am a African American and also part Modoc Indian. I have no hair, but a black and gray goatee with glasses, and I'm sitting in a sitting area outside of my kitchen. I want to thank Laurie Baskin from Theater Communications Group for inviting me into this webinar to engage you all, as well as I appreciate the collaborative effort that has been done for many weeks and even months to across the arts sector, in particular, performing arts sector, to get this pandemic relief legislation across the finish line, as well as ensuring that Congress provides increased appropriations for critical federal agencies that we know and love, including the National Endowment for the Humanities and National Endowment for the Arts. I'm going to provide a high-level major overview of the Paycheck Protection Program, the Second Draw Loan Program, and I welcome any additional comments from my colleagues who I will admit have more technical expertise than I do concerning this program. And so great news, the Paycheck Protection Program is fully open for all participating financial institutions starting today. It's a total of $284.45 billion available for first draw loans for certain eligible entities, and certainly second draw loans for eligible entities that secured a first draw that was established under the CARES Act that was passed in March. The deadline for applications is March 31st of this year. It is, again, administered and is implemented by the Small Business Administration. And again, I mentioned that the program is fully open for all financial institutions starting today. It actually started last week, and it was available for those financial institutions that are in the community development space and actually provide services for women-owned and minority-serving communities. But again, I mentioned it's fully operational today. The SBA has issued a variety of what we call interim final rules, as well as additional guidance concerning the program. These interim final rules are effective immediately. And the Small Business Administration has also indicated that it plans to, as needed, release further interim rules to address specific concerns from the business and nonprofit community, as well as additional guidance as needed and as appropriate to address any additional concerns and issues going forward. And you can see from my slide deck the link that takes you specifically to the Paycheck Protection Program that also contains interim final rules as well as additional guidance. As far as the general eligibility requirements, particularly with the second draw loan program, has the same general loan terms as the first draw. And these terms are the same no matter the lender or the borrower. You can see that there is a revenue loss threshold. Eligible entities have to demonstrate a 25% reduction in gross receipts in any calendar quarter in 2020 compared to the same calendar quarter in 2019. Eligible entities can also do a comparison with the annual gross receipts in the full calendar quarter of 2020 compared to 2019 if the entity was in operation in 2019. As was indicated by Laurie and my other colleague Heather, eligible entities are prohibited from receiving, and I emphasize the term receiving, a shuttered venue operator's grant and a PPP loan. There is no statutory language that precludes eligible entities from applying at this point in time. And we're ensuring as a sector that no eligible entity is to be penalized if they are applying for PPP right now. We understand the anxiety and the eagerness for entities to secure support, and for those entities that have already that are already going through the process of applying for a PPP second draw, we do not want them to be penalized if they also are looking at the shuttered venue operator grant. And then as the eligible requirements, even with the first draw, it is open for other types of smaller entities, including the self-employed, so proprietorships, independent contractors, and then as well as the entities have actually opened up to other types of entities, including 501c6s, other housing cooperatives, marketing organizations, and the like. Gross receipts, and so the SBA actually issued some additional guidance actually today that goes into more the definition of gross receipts, particularly for nonprofit organizations. And so this is based on the Internal Revenue Code of 1986, section 6033. It goes into detail about the gross receipts and what it includes and what it doesn't include. And it includes, but is not limited to, contributions, gifts and grants, dues and assessments from members or affiliated organizations, investment income such as interest, dividends, rent, and royalties. It's important to note that the gross receipts do not and should not include the first draw loans from PPP that are not forgiven. And then as far as your accounting method for your gross receipts is based on what you have been using, either the accrual or the cash accounting method. The guidance, particularly from the guidance that was released today, January 19th, it goes into further information about the necessary documentation that's used for gross receipts. It stipulates that one set is only required, either quarterly financial statements, quarterly or monthly bank statements showing deposits. And if it's not readily indicated or readily understandable from your bank statement, please indicate on your statement what those what the deposits are for those relevant quarters that you're using. And then annual IRS income tax filings. And for the SBA actually issued guidance on how to compute rather the your gross receipts based on your tax return form that you use. And so, for example, the Form 990, there are various lines that you use to calculate based in the Part 8 part of the form. For those entities that are using the Form 990 EZ, there are several lines from Part 1 of the form that you use to make the calculations for the revenue reduction. As far as maximum loan amounts, you can see from my slide deck, entities would calculate, and for the average monthly payroll cost, the maximum is $2 million, and it's 2.5 times the average monthly payroll cost. Again, the maximum for the second draw is $2 million. And so entities would have the choice of the 12 months prior to applying for the loan or using 2020 or 2019 calendar years. If entities have you are utilizing the same financial institution as their first draw loan, along as the participating financial institution has that information and the time frame, no additional payroll documentation is required for the second draw. So that's good for those entities as far as ensuring that there's a seamless and a less arduous process for applying for the second draw. As far as allowable expenses under the current law, allowable expenses has been expanded. As you Just remember there's a 60-40 split for as far as the use of the funds, 60% allocated for payroll, the 40% is the allowable expenses that has been expanded, which includes software and other computing costs, moving expenses, expenses for personal protection equipment and other expenses related to public health and safety guidelines, uninsured property damage related to any type of 2020 protests and demonstrations, certain supplier costs and expenses. Please note that these allowable expenses are actually retroactive to first draw loans that have yet to be forgiven. And then as far as the covered period, eligible entities have can choose a period anywhere between 8 and 24 weeks. It's important to note for loans $150,000 or less, as far as loan forgiveness, documentation must be provided at the time of forgiveness for that actually relates to that 25% gross receipts reduction. As far as those loans that are over $150,000, eligible entities must provide the reduction information, gross receipts reduction information within that second draw application form, which is the 2483-SD application form. So it's important for eligible entities to know that. Things that you can do now, knowing that the program is fully open and operational for participating financial institutions. Eligible entities, please gather your financial information from last year and 2019. Again, the SBA has issued a whole host of guidance and other additional information concerning the program, including the first draw and second draw applications. Consult your financial institution. If you have a CPA and work with a CPA, work with that person as well. And then please note that the SBA will be issuing additional guidance and additional information as issues and concerns come up from the field and from various borrowers and lenders. With that, I will stop sharing my screen and I will kick it back to Laurie for her moderation.
Thank you so much. Oh, I've got feedback. Tony and Heather, thank you so much. I have to say, I meant to say right at the top, TCG has long worked in coalition and in partnership through the Performing Arts Alliance. And Heather and Tony are my trusted partners for many, many years now in our advocacy work, as Heather said, on all of our issues. But what a team this year. So thanks so much for everything and for being here today. I want to turn it to our friends at Arnold and Porter, Jessica and David, whatever order you all wanted to, but you really stepped into this space with us this year or last year, and we're very grateful for all your work, and we look forward to hearing from you now too.
Thank you, Laurie. As Laurie mentioned, my name is Jessica Monahan. I'm a policy advisor at Arnold and Porter, she, her, hers. I hail from the ancestral lands of the Anacostans, located here in Northern Virginia, Alexandria, Virginia, to be specific. Visual description, I am a white woman with hair that is longer and darker than it was at the beginning of the pandemic, sort of a brownish, blondish color. My setting is virtual because I am working from a space that's currently being renovated. So if you were to see my background, it would appear that I'm working from a fabulous office space with orchids and yellow colored couches, but that's not true. It's just a facade. So I will kick things off on behalf of Arnold and Porter, but first I really want to thank Laurie and Teresa for inviting us here today. We haven't known each other for very long, which is hard to believe because I really feel like we've gone to battle together and have walked away with some war wounds and war stories. And we're very grateful for your partnership and your support along the way. We couldn't have done it without TCG. So by way of background, Arnold and Porter was hired a few months ago by the coalition of nonprofit theaters that was formed by Nataki and Oskar and Maria. we are really thrilled to engage in this work. And I think at the onset of our efforts, we viewed our role as supporting and amplifying the work of TCG while bringing additional resources to bear, along with political connections and some targeted strategies. We quickly tried to unpack what the opportunities might be in COVID relief packages, with I think some skepticism that there would be any passage of a bill before the end of the year. So we were pleasantly surprised when things really took off like a rocket in the last couple months of 2020. Finally, something good to come out of that year. So like I said, we really tried to support and coordinate with TCG while bringing our political connections, our relationships on the Hill to really support what was going on and to ensure that nonprofit theaters were not left out as the Save Our Stages legislation was being considered by those negotiating a year-end relief package. So luckily, Heather and Tony and Laurie covered most of the ground as it relates to what is in the legislation itself, what opportunities exist right now for the performing arts communities, for stages across the nation. So we're going to focus our presentation on our outlook for the new administration, for the new Congress, and where we see there being opportunities for future COVID relief legislation. And there really has been, I would say, once we passed the year-end bill, that's where the focus shifted, was, well, what's next? Now, $15 billion for the SVO grants is a lot of money and arguably the most significant modern investment in American stages, as Oskar pointed out. But we do think it's probably short of where there is demand, given the large scope of eligible entities that can qualify under the SVO grants. Now, President-elect Biden will take office tomorrow, and last week he started to lay out his vision for his first 100 days in office. That includes a $1.9 trillion rescue plan that was released late last week. This rescue plan is really to build off of what was passed at the end of the year. It's also just a grand vision with some detail, but it's not legislative text by any means. That is meant to spur negotiations within Congress and to give some backing to people like Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, as they look forward to building off of what was done at the end of the year. So some of the areas that plan really emphasized were $15 per hour minimum wage, direct payments to individuals, aid to state and local governments, aid to sectors of the economy that were left out of the year-end package, such as restaurants, investments in schools so they can safely reopen, and vaccine distribution. Now, these are really areas where Democrats feel that the year-end bill fell short and that they would have liked to see in a larger package, but they didn't have that opportunity. So it's more comparable to what we had considered earlier in the year under the HEROES Act that came out of the House, but we don't have enough detail to say definitively what all would be included. But we do suspect, since the intention is to roll this out in the first 100 days, that this may be in conflict with an opportunity to get additional funding for the SVO grants because of the implementation timeline we are anticipating. That's not to say it's an impossibility by any means, but if we're pursuing legislation in the first 100 days and we don't yet have a sense of when the SVO grants will be available for not just application, but distribution, especially given how the SBA appears to be interpreting the law with this 60-day initial grant period, it would leave one to believe that an argument that this program is oversubscribed and underfunded will be very difficult to make. So we're looking beyond just the first 100 days and any immediate relief efforts and thinking more broadly about how Democrats are going to view their role in the majority through not just relief legislation, but recovery legislation. If you think about what happened in 2009 when President Obama took office and the economy was faltering, they really needed a very quick infusion of cash to revive and revitalize the US economy. That might be something that Democrats are looking toward as the United States starts to achieve herd immunity with mass vaccine distribution, which I believe scientists and the medical community is anticipating will occur somewhere around the fall timeframe. This may open a window for Congress to proceed to sort of a recovery or revitalization legislation in the spring fall timeframe. That might be a great opportunity, especially if it is very clear that the SBO grants have not just been successful and have done so much, and they're great success stories over their investments throughout communities in the United States, but also to show that there's so much need, so much more need as we expect, then could be fulfilled with simply $15 billion. So that's something that we're looking toward as a coalition, as a firm. We have a lot of clients, as you might imagine, who were either pleased with the year-end package or found that it fell short for their industries. So this is something we're working on very closely. And I'll hand it over to David to talk a little bit more about how we're focusing on implementation of the SBO grants.
Great, thanks, Jessica. David Skillman, I'm a senior associate here at Arnold Porter. He, him, his, for visual description, white man, very little hair, dressed in, what else but a blue blazer. And for those of you who can't see my little window, I've got a backdrop that is the DC offices of Arnold and Porter. If you ever get the chance to drop by when we're in a post-pandemic place, we'd love to invite you back by the firm. Given Jess's outline there of the sort of rescue recovery dichotomy, that's the president's sort of approach to legislation, there are a couple of things that we need to focus on in a near-term position. One is making sure this program works. So all of the details that have been laid out here sort of demonstrate our current understanding, but I want to stress that they are sort of the first draft from the SBA's interpretation of the statute, all of our work and the affiliates here who are looking at these positions. We haven't issued any grants yet, and these are TBD, right? They are to be worked out, and we need to make sure that these funds and these programs are stood up in a way that you can access these programs, and that the SBA in turn is following the law as the statute was written. And we understand there were maybe some misses there in their initial presentation, and we're working with them and all of you to make sure those get worked out. The flip side of that is working very closely with our Hill colleagues, our Capitol Hill colleagues and champions on Capitol Hill. So we identified some of them at the very beginning of this presentation. They have a lot of ownership. They have a lot of credibility on the line because they fought very hard to make this program work for weeks leading up to the actual enactment of this legislation. There was a lot of back and forth conversations between all of the champions in the Senate side, between the House leaders, between the Senate leadership, and between the members like Cornyn, like Klobuchar, who really stood up to push this on firm foundations at the very beginning of the outset. We need to expand that group. They want to know that this program is working. We need to make sure those details get back to them, and our sort of granular experience of going through this program gets back to them so that they can work with us to make sure the SBA is appropriately administrating this program. That will build on, I think, the going forward task that Jessica outlined, which is making sure that this is demonstrating success, that we're being good stewards of these federal dollars, that they are being pushed out into the uses that they were intended for. So $15 billion is a significant investment. They want to see returns, and that means, that organizations are putting them to good use, that we're not getting headlines, negative headlines, that we're putting people to work, that we're shoring up the foundations of the American cultural institutions that take these dollars. We need to give our Hill advocates and our allies the tools they need to be advocates for you. So when they go and talk to the SBA leadership, when they talk to the Biden administration, when they're thinking about these programs, they have good stories to tell about how this program is working, or granular examples, hard-edged examples that show how the program isn't working and that they can push and fix those programs. That will set up the key conversations for this summer fall window that Jessica outlined. So we've moved from rescue of the economy, from immediate response on pandemic response and testing and vaccinations, to an economic recovery. And that may correspond roughly with the exhaustion of these funds at the SBA and some of these other programs like the second draw at PPP. We will have a legislative window at that point that, if we've done our work here, if we've illustrated the success of the program, if we've shown how the program is functioning, if we've corrected any deficiencies in the administration of that program, to go back to our Hill allies, to talk to the administration, and to hopefully refill those funds, or find out what the next step is. What's the next investment that they can make to make sure that everybody's back on their feet and working hard. Why don't I stop there and turn it back over to Laurie? But thanks very much for everybody's hard work on this.
Thank you, Jessica and David, for being here and for that big picture, high-level look at what happened in Washington and some next steps, which are absolutely important. We're not through this yet. I actually want to turn us now. We have a good half hour. We'll see how long it takes. I would like very much to try and tackle some of the questions. Hopefully we'll get through all of them in the Q&A. But before I actually start reading through them like one at a time, there is a sort of overarching theme, questions around, can we really apply for both SVOG and PPP2 and just accept one? Is that really possible? Is that what you're all recommending to try and hedge bets? So I know Tony wanted to weigh in on that, but it's an important point because the timeline is off. We already know significantly more about PPP2 than we do about SVOG. One question in there is, do we know when the applications will actually open up for shuttered venues? We don't know exactly. I would expect in the next couple weeks. But as we're trying to figure out the timeline and the best way to proceed, can people apply for both, but only accept one? Who wants to weigh in? Panel? Tony, did you want to?
So as I indicated in my presentation, please, for my colleagues to jump in, there is no statutory language that precludes entities from applying. You'll see from the first draw application, as well as from the statutory language, that entities cannot receive funding from both SVOG and PPP. So I'll stop there, and I'll just leave it there and have my other colleagues jump in. I've been telling.
Heather, just to, I see Jessica is about to give us the absolute answer on this. But unfortunately, all we can say is what Tony said. Every bit of formal guidance from the law to the PPP forms only uses the word receive, which means it's an opening for it to be allowable. We also know that the agencies can add extra layers on top of this. And so I will just say, this is the top priority question that we have posed collectively to SBA. And just as soon as we can get a clear answer, I know you'll hear it shouted from the rooftops from all of us.
So the only thing I would add to that is, during last week's presentation by the SBA for the SVO grants, they did say that in your application for PPP2 or any new first round PPP loans that would happen after December 27, 2020, you'll be asked to certify that you have not and will not receive an SVO grant. Now, this is not from the statutory language. This is an interpretation by SBA that has raised a lot of questions and red flags. And these are the areas where we engage our Hill allies, because there appear to be several discrepancies in how SBA is implementing the law versus congressional intent.
I've been telling my Dance USA and Opera America members just to hold off for a couple of weeks. Laurie indicated that the anticipation is that the shuttered venue operators program will be up and running within the next 2 to 3 weeks, if not sooner. And so if you all can just hold off so we can, if we see any additional guidance or any information coming out from the SBA concerning the program, then you can make the best determination based on the information that's being put out. So,
and I see somebody asked in the chat if they've already received their second draw at PPP, what do they do now? I think, take a beat, decide if you really wanted SVOG and talk to your banker, I guess, or wait for guidance from SBA before making a final decision, I guess. My guess is you could probably return the money. I don't know, but it does say receive. Even what Jessica shared from the SBA webinar last week, it said you had to certify that you won't receive both. It didn't say you couldn't, they still didn't say you couldn't apply for both. So we're hoping, I would feel much more comfortable with a feedback from SBA on this point. There's a question in the chat, SVOG's priority rounds. Is it about decrease in all revenue or only earned revenue? Heather, you talked about accessing the priority periods. Would you talk about where we are with what definition or what the eligibility requirement is based on? Is it all revenue, just earned revenue?
Yeah, so in the legislation, just for the 2 14-day priority periods, the language simply says revenue. And similarly, the SBA website on the outline I shared with you of how the priority periods work also says revenue. So we don't yet have a determination on whether this will be gross revenue, total revenue, earned revenue, gross earned revenue. We're waiting for the answer for that.
I do think that the original intent was that it would be based on gross revenue decline, but it doesn't say that. And so we're hoping it goes in a different direction and we don't have a final rule on that. Would you disagree with that, Heather? Can't hear you.
We just have to wait for a clearer answer from SBA. In the meantime, obviously, whether it's looking at PPP or looking at the overall 25% gross earned revenue decline, and even when you're looking at ERTC, you want to spend your time right now getting a really good, clear look on your books quarter by quarter for last year and see, depending on which way they go, what your numbers are going to look like. It's the best thing we can do while we wait for a clear answer.
Right. In regards to, I'm reading another question, relief funds already accessed through the CARES Act that will not count as revenue for this calculation. Does this mean if we received grant monies through our state or city, and that this, in other words, it's flow through CARES Act funding, would they exclude those dollars? Does anybody know?
That's a question we don't have the answer to.
Another question is the 20% reserved for after the priority period completely separate from the $2 billion reserved for applicants with up to 50 employees? Yes, those are separate. Agreed, team?
So it was separated in the structure of the legislation. But again, when we see SBA completely reorganizing the priority periods in ways that weren't articulated in the legislation, I don't think we can be sure right now how they would administer that 20% non-priority reserve. Whether that would somehow happen in the first 60 days or beyond it is not yet clear. Jessica, you look like you're nodding.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Heather. I would also state that based on how we interpreted the statutory language, that $2 billion set aside was out of the total programs. That could have come out of entities that were eligible under the priority periods. It could have come out of from the tranche available for the 20% set aside, it didn't matter statutorily how that $2 billion was captured, other than the fact that if it was left, any of it was unspent after 60 days, it would then go back and be available to the larger pot. So it's possible, depending on how SBA chooses to implement this, that the $2 billion could fall under the 20% set aside, or it might fall outside. Like Heather said, we don't know for sure yet.
Okay. There's a question about the intersection or interaction between ERTC and SVOG. We know that retroactively one can go for PPP, or you did last year, and you can now retroactively go for ERTC, and that ERTC and PPP2 are okay together. Does anybody have, do we have an answer yet? I think it doesn't say that an entity cannot go for both, but I don't know that I've heard an affirmative, you can, right?
Right, that's exactly right. So there's nothing in the bill language to state that you can't use both. I think for most, we would just assume that the same restriction would apply, that you couldn't apply both to the same wages. Another thing to keep in mind about the ERTC for 2021 is that so far it's only addressing the first 2 quarters of this year. And the eligible expenditure period for the operator grants is much longer than that. So another opportunity is to be able to stack the way that you use these federal resources really clearly. And then I would also just say, you know, in addition, as we talk about ongoing advocacy priorities, that ERTC is such a terrifically supportive vehicle to retain employees and support workforce on payroll that we want to see it go beyond the first 2 quarters if possible. But for now, we're just looking at, you know, Q1 and Q2 of 2021 for the expanded ERTC.
Right. Thank you. So again, confirming, because there was another question on the first 3 priority periods as described by SBA are for entities with 50 or fewer employees, and then everyone else applies after the first 60 days. Yes, that is what SBA has said. I think, who knows, perhaps still subject to change, but yes, that's what their website says. When calculating revenue loss, do we include contributed revenue? And I think we've covered, we don't know yet the definitions of revenue, whether they're including contributed or not, whether it's gross revenue or earned revenue. As soon as we know, we will let you all know. That was a question about timeline, ERTC. With regard to PPP2, if our organization was not able to use the full amount of PPP1 loan on forgivable expenses, they will return the unspent portion that has no attributable expense. I'm not sure what the question is. Can they go, I guess, go for SVOG? It wasn't quite clear to me. I'm sorry what the question was. Is it possible? Let's see, that's the same question. Somebody is asking about services that help with application filing. We will get back to you who asked that question in particular. Yes, TCG will be trying to provide that help, especially for BITOC organizations.
And Laurie, let me just add, I think Heather mentioned this, that the Small Business Administration has district offices across the country, and these are designed, and their purpose should be helping businesses and nonprofits actually wade through these various pandemic relief programs, whether that's providing technical assistance or the like. And so please note that these offices are out there and open to help entities be able to wade through these programs.
There's a question that says, for the first draw of PPP, this entity used the 4 quarters from April 1, 2019 to March 31st, 2020 to calculate average monthly payroll, which was allowed at the time. Can they use the same time period for the second draw? The bank had it auto-filled in their second draw application from the first draw application. I don't know the answer to that. Does anybody? That might be an SBA question then. Yes, I'm going to release this as a recording and a slide deck, both. There's a question about the schedule for Isabel Guzman's nomination. And do we expect that SVOG guidance may change once she is in place? I'm wondering if Arnold and Porter would like to weigh in on that one.
David, do you have thoughts?
I don't at present.
We do know that the SBA is currently operating on a very small staff, and that there will likely be additional resources available to that office under a Biden administration and with a new SBA administrator. We don't know exactly when she will be installed, so it's hard to say how that timing may affect the implementation of SBO grants. There's still so many unknowns, and this is very much, it's a difficult timing to say the least, to have this all happen right as we're transitioning between administrations. That is very clear. It's hard to say confidently that how staff is interpreting things right now would differ if they had waited a couple of weeks before rolling out some of the initial guidance. We'll have to wait and see, unfortunately.
One thing I would just add to that is we all are seasoned, all of us, you on the other end receiving this webinar, on how much guidance can change, because we saw some huge changes and rolling back of some of the implementation, initial implementation plans for PPP in response to public comments to SBA, in response to pressure to representatives in Congress. We saw a real transformation in PPP over time. And I would just say for PPP second draw, we're now in an open public comment period where the public and those meant to be helped by this program can tell SBA what they're seeing that's problematic and where things need to be changed. And that will be true for the shuttered venue operators grants as well. When they issue the rules, they will be open to public comment. So just know that as you identify problems or questions, sharing those with your service organizations, but also sharing them with your representatives in Congress really does make a difference. You do get heard. So there's always a potential for change and improvement.
Oh, I think if there's any lesson learned from this last year, it's that advocacy works, right? Totally. There was a question about PPP loan forgiveness in relation to applying for PPP2. And is there any reason to wait before applying for forgiveness, or should they go ahead and submit paperwork for both concurrently? As I understand it, you have to have spent all your PPP1 money before you can receive PPP2 money. But I don't know if there's any information about applying for forgiveness or that timetable as it relates to PPP2. Does anybody have any more information on that?
So
Okay.
you do not have to have applied for forgiveness in order to apply for a PPP2 fund. Just bear in mind that PPP loans start out as loans and they don't become forgivable until you apply for that loan forgiveness. So there may be many applicants that, will never apply for a first draw loan forgiveness and nonetheless are seeking PPP second draws. So that you don't have to sequence it that way. I would just say you want to check with, your in-house and out-of-house financial advisors on how you're looking at eligible expenses and how those line up and the time frame, and make some smart choices around that. But I'm not aware of a prohibition on applying before forgiveness has been initiated.
Any concern that there wouldn't be money for forgiveness if you wait too long? Probably not on PPP. Right. This organization is a small rural summer theater in upstate New York. They don't sell tickets or charge admission. They do take reservations and collect donations. Performance donations only make up about 25% of the revenue. Are they out of the running for an SVOG grant? I would say I'd need to know more about what else comprises your earned revenue beyond ticket sales? Are you, is there rental income, other performance related income, education program income? Because there are other elements that make up that pie. Right, folks? We'd need to know more, but there are more elements that could be included. So no, I don't think you're necessarily out of the running, but there are more pieces. Question, are we safe to stop paying our payroll taxes if we know we are eligible for ERTC? No,
No, and so the two interplay with each other. So compliance on all payroll taxes is an essential thing to continue doing. I think it is important that you take a look at, again, I'm sorry that all we have is last year's information as a reference point, but I think there'll be some very familiar patterns to how this works in 2021. So take a look at this FAQ because from Treasury, which is posted in the chat box, because it will give you some information about how to account for your payroll tax expenditures, how to document that you were shuttered, and it will also give you some information again about how you can apply for an advance on your credit, which I know for some organizations, many organizations where cash flow is a big problem, those advances become really important.
Somebody is asking about a clarification around the employee calculation. Is it clear that it's 50 full-time equivalents or 50 individuals? I think it's not clear yet. Right. We don't know yet. And yes, the question around earned revenue or all revenue, we don't know the answer to that definition yet either. A theater in Michigan has been closed since March 18th of 2020. So earned income has been zero, fewer than 10 employees. Should be SVOG eligible, correct?
I think this is one of those instances where it's going to come down to gross versus earned revenue. Every theater we worked with has had down to zero on their earned revenue side for the most part. But because of charitable contributions and other sources of revenue, that changes the calculus. And so depending on how SBA interprets earned revenue versus gross earned revenue versus revenue, that will really be a determinant.
Right. The risk of applying for PPP while awaiting for SVOG is that PPP will most likely be approved fairly quickly. Yes, PPP is definitely more ready to roll out now. But if you can hang out a little bit longer and wait to find out more about SVOG, perhaps we'll have enough information so you can make informed decisions, better informed decisions anyway. What is the expectation of whether SVOG has enough money to make it to the third priority and beyond to get to small nonprofits or let's say nonprofits in general? We don't know. We hope so. We think so. I will say this I'll speak only for myself. I know that Senator Schumer was a huge champion of this thing, huge, and he is poised to become majority leader. So we have a big champion. There's no guarantee in that, but we do have a huge champion. If the pot is completely expended and we want more, we would certainly all be advocating for that. I don't know if that helps in your calculations, but I think it's a piece of the picture. Is there any indication as to whether there will be priority given to under 50 full-time equivalent organizations that fall into the third category? I think the third category is exclusively under 50. All three priorities are under 50 for the first 60 days. That's my understanding of what SBA rolled out last week.
Based on what SBA rolled out last week, that's correct. That's arguably inconsistent with the statutory language and congressional intent. So I would make note of that as a potential area where things might change. No guarantees.
Yes, thank you. Exactly. For the PPP2 revenue decline measurement, Why are restricted contributions considered equitable for nonprofits to have to include?
I think the answer is they aren't. So including unrealized gains, whether it's capital gifts or churn in investments, does not feel appropriate to the nonprofit sector. This is a point that's being raised to SBA, especially because the for-profit guidance actually gives them far more flexibility to only chart income, actual income that lands in their operating budget. So you've spotted the problem. It's definitely a problem. For now, as of today, this new guidance issued on the definition of gross receipts is what holds. It's really important for you to be in touch with your service organization, to kind of go on record and be in touch with your representatives in Congress and tell them, if this is the thing that excludes your eligibility from PPP, please let them know. It's fixable with the right kind of guidelines and modification from Congress as well.
Thank you. The next question has to do again with the full-time, the FTE employee calculation. The question is, what's the time frame for that calculation? Do we mean currently or prior to COVID? Do we even know? I don't think we have clarity on that. Is that right? Yeah, no, we don't know yet. Another unanswered question. There's really, SBA has only just begun to release information, and there is so much we don't know yet. We spent with regard to not being able to apply for PPP2, if we haven't spent all of PPP1, does that mean spending it all during the forgivable period? I don't know the timetable on forgivable period. It means certainly spending it all. I mean, I think all the instructions I've seen are you have to spend it before receiving PPP2. I'm afraid I don't know about the period in which you have to spend it. Does anybody else know anymore? I'm moving on to the next question. When do these application periods begin? I assume that's on SVOG. SBA will tell us when they open the application, and then the deadlines for each of the priority periods will roll out from the time that they open the applications. They did tell us last week in the webinar that they would give advance notice on what those time periods would be before just opening the door and saying like now, and that there would be more, training and webinars, but we don't know the exact dates yet.
Yeah, and Laurie, didn't they say during the webinar last week that everyone would be able to apply from the start, that there wouldn't be a waiting period, but rather that it would be granted based on those priority periods, but the applications would all be due at once?
Yes, I heard that too. So the minute it opens up, if you have all your stuff ready, get your applications in, because I will say that it does sound like a first come, first serve type of thing within each tranche. And so you do want to get your application in as soon as possible, even if it's before the priority period that you think you would be eligible for, get it in right away. Another one, the language on the slide said that in order to be eligible for PPP2, we must have used or will use the full amount of the first loan. If we do not use the full amount because we did not have enough forgivable expenses, are we not eligible for PPP2? Yeah, if you didn't use the full amount of PPP1, you can't accept PPP2 is my understanding. That's correct. For PPP2, is the forgiveness period 8 weeks or can it be longer like PPP1? Does anybody know?
Well, this is a terrific improvement. I mean, my understanding is that instead of choosing either 8 weeks or 24 weeks, you now get to choose your favorite time frame within 8 to 24 weeks for future PPP loans. This is something that I think makes a lot of sense to anyone who navigated last year's PPP program. So you can find the details on that in the interim final rules for PPP second draw.
Thank you. Back to a question about restricted contributions. I think that you answered, Heather, saying that this person was right. This person says he means that those are restricted to those that are restricted to future years, especially. They are time restricted. Does it seem fair to include those? No.
So just to be clear, though, we're talking about many different programs with some definitions are defined and some are not. So our earlier reference to the problems with gross receipts applies only to the PPP program. We still don't have definitions for the shuttered venue operator grants.
Right. As far as other earned revenue, the only other earned income this theater has is from playbill ad sales, approximately 5 to 10% of earned revenue. No other earned revenue. The rest of the budget is donations and grants. So then you're going to wait to hear how the definitions play out and what it's going to be based on, what the definitions of what's included in earned revenue, or whether they're going to be basing it on gross revenue. Or so stay tuned. And as soon as we know, we will let you know. I'm scrolling through because I think we've answered some of these questions already. IRS guidance says you can hold your federal income tax deposits in order to take the ERTC, and I just heard the opposite answer from you, so now this person is confused. From the IRS, in anticipation of receiving ERTC, employers can fund qualified wages by 1, accessing federal employment taxes, including withheld taxes that are required to be deposited with the IRS, and 2, requesting an advance of the credit from the IRS for the amount of the credit that is not funded by accessing the federal employment tax deposits by filing Form 7200, advance payment of employer credits due to COVID-19.
Right. So that's the advance we talked about earlier that helps a great deal with cash flow. You still have to account for all aspects of this. And again, look at that FAQ that was posted up much further up now in the chat feature to see how this works.
For FTE, should it be year-round employees and full seasonal employees? Do you need to include actors who were going to only be employed for the performance that was occurring at the end of February, maximum of 6 weeks of employment? Again, I think we just need clarification from SBA on how they're going to do their calculations, how they're going to guide us. Does anybody have any better insight into that one?
The statute does have some definitions of FTEs and how to calculate FTEs. It does not talk about the term that they were employed for. And oftentimes it's my understanding that your actors are not going to be counted among your FTE staff because they will have been a 1099 or a different type of economic relationship. So I think there are a lot of questions there.
I see that there are a couple more questions. We will look and see if there's anything that we didn't answer, but we are approaching the end of we're pretty much at time. Thank you to the panel. You all have been so extraordinary. We've shared a great deal of information here today. I think that we will likely need to do a part 2 once we actually have guidance from SBA on so many unanswered questions. So thanks to all the participants and the panelists. I'm going to turn it back to Teresa now to close us out.
Thank you, Laurie. I really want to share tremendous gratitude to our presenters for sharing your experience, your knowledge, just so generously today. So I invite everyone to give them some love or a shout out in the chat box. You could do that as we continue to wrap up here. Big thanks to Laurie Baskin. Laurie, thank you for your advocacy, and to the TCG team for preparing the presentation today. And of course, you heard about our collective advocacy through the Performing Arts Alliance, where we get to work with the remarkable Tony Shivers and of course the remarkable Heather Noonan. And we work with leaders from a variety of arts disciplines. So it's really been a team effort. Thanks to Oskar, thanks to Nataki, and of course, Jessica Monahan and David Skillman from Arnold and Porter. If you can, please consider supporting this work at tcg.org/donate. We know it's a long road ahead, so your gift will help us sustain this exciting momentum, both on the advocacy front, but also our commitment to supporting you and getting answers and assistance. Don't forget the finance director's circle. You can email Corinna about how to join that. And finally, I'll just close by wishing us all a peaceful, joyful, and transformative Inauguration Day tomorrow. And by promising that this is not the end of our advocacy work, as I mentioned a second ago, or our support in accessing it as we move forward into a new administration. A couple of you asked about archive videos and other resources. We're going to be sharing those soon, within the next few days. And we will send more information on upcoming opportunities for technical assistance. So until then, thank you for joining us. Thank you. I really want to also offer a big shout out to the TCG staff who managed this webinar, especially Corinna Schulenberg and Anne Charlone. And thank you all for making this hour and a half today and being so attentive and having such great questions that really support this network of peers who are making it possible for us to have such a rich and diverse and powerful arts ecosystem in this country. So goodbye now. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.